We have a lot to cover in today's video, including lots of NHL offseason trade rumors. Today we're looking at the Toronto Maple Leafs, looking at Marty Necas and where he might end up. There's some intel suggesting that a deal could come together quickly. We also have the latest on the Panthers and the Rangers, plus the latest on Jake Guentzel's potential free agency. The Stanley Cup final is now set. The Oilers have advanced, and we will discuss the upcoming final as well as some of the key stats around it. Plus the Memorial Cup's been decided as well. All that and a few other details around the league coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have lots to cover today. Let's first get started by talking about the Stanley Cup final and the Western final that was settled last night with the Edmonton Oilers advancing and eliminating the Dallas Stars with a Game 6 2-1 victory. It certainly was an interesting game. I think for the most part early on, it was fairly evenly matched. The Oilers took advantage of a couple of early power plays and scored power play goals and take a 2-0 lead. The Dallas Stars, I think for the most part, can say they played a relatively good game. I thought Stuart Skinner was really, really good. It was probably one of Skinner's best games, certainly of this playoffs for sure. He held them in there in the third period. I thought it was mostly Dallas trying to make the comeback. They got one from Marchment to make it interesting in the second half of the third period. But at the end of the day, the Oilers, it was a case of saying they bent but didn't break. In the past, we might have seen times where the Oilers did collapse. We've seen it too many times before, but they managed to stay within their structure. The D was still playing relatively well and give up a few more chances than they probably would have liked. As McDavid said in a post-game interview, sometimes they have means to make it stressful. Sometimes they don't ask you how you get it done, just that you did get it done. And that was one of those cases. It wasn't the absolute best game for the Oilers, but they found a way. And they were pushed up against the wall, by the Stars pushing at the end, and they survived. That simple. The Oilers had a really good game overall. Not too many players that didn't really contribute or play well in some capacity. Dallas had a good, solid game overall as well, and just couldn't find the way to come back. At the end of the day, I thought in the previous game, the Stars kind of looked like they were out of gas, out of steam. They found some energy in this game, but it was not enough at the end of the day. So the Oilers advance, and they will meet the Florida Panthers in the Stanley Cup final. You have to wonder as well, after the Stars were eliminated, could that have been the last time that we see Joe Pavelski? Joe Pavelski, I believe he's 39 now. He has a pending UFA. He's been doing shorter-term deals since he left San Jose and ended up in Dallas. And in his first go around with the Stars, he extended as soon as he was able to. This time he didn't. His regular season was still pretty good this past year, but his playoffs were a bit of a struggle, and as the playoffs went on, he found himself removed from the first power play, saw himself demoted to the bottom six, and he just seemed to be having a bit of a struggle. This wasn't the same Joe Pavelski we've seen in the past, the difference maker, but he still had a tremendous impact on that team. I know a lot of the younger players that have been living and staying with him the past couple of years have been extremely grateful to have him around and to learn from him and all his vast amounts of knowledge and experience that he's gained. Quite a player. Had a heck of a career if that is indeed it. He's missing that elusive Stanley Cup, but otherwise, he's accomplished a heck of a lot and has lots to be proud of. So we're curious to see if that was, it for him, or if he'll find a way to dig deep and come back for another go-round here. So we'll see what happens on that front. I'm not sure when we'll get clarity. Of course, with the Oilers winning last night, Corey Perry had a good solid day's work and earned himself a $50,000 bonus. Not bad for a day's work at all by making the Stanley Cup final, which was built into his contract. He does have a $50,000 bonus in there. So good day for him overall. And Perry also becomes the first player ever in NHL history to appear in the Stanley Cup finals with 5 different teams. Unfortunately, he only has one victory, and it's the very first time with his longtime team, the Anaheim Ducks, back in 2007. Since leaving Anaheim, he's had a lot of appearances in the finals. Of course, he went from Dallas to Montreal to Tampa and now to Edmonton. Certainly, quite a long run for him, and he gets to make history there as well. This is also going to be the Stanley Cup final, where the two teams are going to be geographically the furthest apart by air distance that they've ever been ever. We're going to be over 4,000 kilometers of air travel each way to go between Florida and Edmonton. Obviously, the Stanley Cup Final will not get started until next weekend on Saturday. I know it's a long haul. If it goes 7 games, it's going to be all the way to the 24th. Not long after that, you have the draft on the 28th. It's going to be really, really tight. I really wish the schedule makers could have figured out getting this wrapped up a little bit sooner. But that it is what it is. There's nothing we can do about that, I guess. The Memorial Cup was also handed out last night. The Saginaw Spirit, the host team, stunned the London Knights, who were the favorites, and took the Memorial Cup championship last night. It was looking like it was going to be a Saginaw win early on. They built up a 3-0 lead, but of course you can never count out those London Knights. They had a really solid comeback, tied it up at 3 in the third period. I know Easton Cowan was having a heck of a game. Sam Dickinson, draft eligible this year, had a heck of a rush, and he scored a big goal. They get the game tied, but then with 20 seconds left, the Spirit come back and scored again to take the lead, 4-3. Josh Bloom, who's a Canucks prospect, scored the winning goal with like around 20 seconds left, and that secured things there. So Saginaw will get to be the Memorial Cup champions after that huge victory. And the host team, again, even though they weren't league champions, they won. That's a few times now in recent years we've seen that happen. Of course, that Saginaw team has some good talent on it. They picked up Owen Beck in a trade. He became the Memorial Cup MVP. Had a heck of a tournament for them to help them win. I know Zane Parekh certainly had a bit of a coming out party along with Sam Dickinson in London. A couple of top draft eligibles this year as well. So certainly it was a heck of a game. It was flipping back and forth between the Memorial Cup and the Oilers and Stars game last night. So it was lots of good hockey on. Now we're without any for a good stretch here. The Anaheim Ducks today signed a prospect, a very interesting looking one at that. He gets a 3-year entry-level contract, and that's Damian Clara, who is a 6'6" Swedish goaltender. So certainly another massive goalie in their system now that's fully under contract. And the Red Wings today signed a European free agent, Jakub Kielowski. He gets a 2-year ELC from Czechia. He comes over on a UFA contract. Lots of rumors around the NHL, a variety of things. I know it was mentioned today by Dave Pagnotta that Canes forward Jake Guentzel, even though there is interest between himself and the Canes to remain there and sign a new contract, that it's looking more and more likely that he's going to actually head to market and will test the free agency before he settles on his next destination, or which could end up still remaining with the Canes. It's hard to say exactly how that's all going to play out. Like I said, he certainly enjoyed his time there. He was productive. He was a good fit. I don't think there's any concerns that way. Obviously, at this point, he wants to get probably one more long-term deal, kind of settle in and make sure he's paid fairly. And I guess we'll have to wait and see. I don't know how early negotiations have gone. I would suspect not the greatest if he's trending towards taking it to market. So I know that's going to be a player out there that is going to get a lot of teams interested. I know Vancouver was one of those teams who were hoping to speak to him and try to bring him to Vancouver after the large Pittsburgh contingency that they've brought there, but it is believed that he would prefer to stay stateside. We don't know that for certain, of course, but between Carolina and some of the other U.S. teams might have an edge on getting Guentzel's services. But right now, not a given that he re-signs and stays in Carolina, even though that's mostly what's been talked about in the intel on that situation up until today, when things kind of seem to have changed here a little bit. Now, staying with the Hurricanes, I know Marty Necas is one of those names out there that's generating a ton of interest and is one of the top young players around the league that's expected to be likely moved. Of course, the Canes have a lot of players that need to be sorted out and dealt with here in one capacity or another, either re-sign or may end up leaving for other teams. They have a lot of UFAs and some RFAs that they can't afford to keep them all. It's just that simple. I mean, a guy like Seth Jarvis is due for an extension, and he's likely going to take priority over Necas, and that alone, not to mention some of the Blue Liners are trying to keep and other guys that need signing. It's going to be tight, and the belief is that Necas more than likely gets traded. I know Frank Saravalli of dailyfaceoff.com today said he wouldn't be surprised if the Necas trade actually happened this week before we get to Game 1 of the Stanley Cup Final coming up on Saturday. Elliot Friedman on his most recent podcast as well also said that he could see former Carolina GM Don Waddell, who's now in Columbus, being one of the teams that pushes to try to acquire him. Of course, Waddell knows him extremely well and knows what he's capable of. Also has gone through negotiations with him before, knows what to expect. And really, I think for the rumors that Nate just wants a bigger role, more power play time, etc. Like, he could get that in Columbus, and Waddell could likely assure him of that. So, to get him signed, which is likely going to be somewhere in that $7.5 or so million range, I think it's reasonable to expect that Columbus would not have an issue getting that done. Now, whether or not he will want to go to Columbus, maybe another story. At this point, he doesn't have any trade protection, so not like he'd have a choice, but he could choose not to sign a new contract. At the end of the day, Waddell's not going to make that move without knowing that a contract extension, of course, can be reached, but be interesting to see. Of course, there's been other teams that have been linked to Necas as well. We've heard about interest from Vancouver. We've heard about interest from Montreal. I'm sure there's going to be a long list of teams that have interest in this player. He's a top, still a guy who's young, not hit his full prime yet, and still capable of putting up 70, 80 points, right shot, can play center, can play wing, good on the power play. There's lots to like about his game. Really is lots of talent there. So I have no doubt there'd be a number of teams that would have interest as well. Now, we do know that David Pastrnak in Boston has been doing some recruiting, and of course, Necas was one of those guys who went over to join the World Championship team along with Pastrnak from Boston and Pavel Zacha. I wonder if Pastrnak will be doing some recruiting to try to bring him to Boston, because the Bruins could certainly use a player like Necas. They certainly have some flexibility. They have, some top 6 spots that could be up for grabs, or some, could be changed and turned over this year. I wonder if they'll get in the mix. I know, Pastrnak, it was kind of a bit of a running joke, but it really wasn't. Like, he really was trying to recruit players to come to Boston that he's either friends with, or, from his home country, or that he trains with. I know with Leon Draisaitl being one of them, which at this point we don't have any reason to think he's going there, but it is something that Pastrnak has openly talked about. So we'll see if the Necas deal comes together quickly or how that all works out. But a number of teams in the mix. I don't know. I'm not really sure we can say Columbus will be the favorites because of Waddell, but they'll certainly be one of the teams having conversations about it. I know when it comes to Toronto, Elliot Friedman today on the 32 Thoughts podcast was saying that there's some within the Leafs organization that are really worried about a Marner trade, worried that they're going to have regrets, worried that he's going to go to another team, figure things out, be the playoff performer they want him to be, and end up having success and winning a Stanley Cup elsewhere. We've seen what happened when they traded Nazem Kadri. Of course, they were mad at Kadri and they were disappointed and thought they couldn't trust him anymore after getting major suspensions 2 playoff series in a row. And then they trade him, and then not long after, he's a Stanley Cup champion in Colorado. I think it was a deal they regretted doing, but at the time, they felt they needed to do. And this is, not exactly the same scenario, but it's a scenario where a player's still young enough, still impactful enough. You have to be careful. I've said it numerous times. They have to be careful with this, because if they get it wrong, they're going to end up setting themselves back instead of helping the team get better, which ultimately is what you want to accomplish here. You don't want to move on from a guy who has that much talent just because you think you need to. Like, you need to get the right pieces back. You need to make the team better, make them deeper, more balanced, and that could be, lots of teams out there are going to have interest in Marner if they decide they want to do it. And we've talked numerous times about different packages that could be available, and I think there could be lots of great deals out there available for him that would make a lot of sense to me. But whether or not they get it done, hard to say. But Friedman says he wouldn't be completely shocked if things did kind of play out in Toronto over the next year, and then he's not traded in, but it goes into the next season not signed either. He feels that Marner would be a player who would probably get a lot of I don't know what they want to. I can't remember exactly how he worded it, but essentially, that the fans would be uneasy with going into next season if he's not signed, not knowing if he's going to be here long term or not. And it's understandable to some degree, of course, but I understand why some members of the organization would be reluctant or concerned about making that trade. They got to make sure they get it right. It's just that simple, but they can't bring back the exact same group yet again. There's just no way. They have to try to change things up and go with a different mix. If it's not Marner, then who's going to go? Like, somebody's got to I really think they need to try something different here. It's not going to be Matthews. It's not going to be Nylander. We talked yesterday about would they actually talk to Tavares. Tavares, like I said before, is a player that they never really fully needed. I think they kind of went for the top free agent guy that was the homecoming, into Toronto, but it wasn't really what they needed. They should have invested in other areas. And then these other three contracts in the forward group wouldn't be such a problem for them if they didn't have this one, which only has 1 year left on it. So difficult to say how this all plays out, but the latest intel on Marner from Friedman basically is that, a lot of nerves within the organization, and there's some that are reluctant to pull the trigger on a deal. So we'll see how this all plays out. In Florida, there's a report on the Toronto Sun suggesting that a name like Aaron Ekblad could be made available this summer as well. We know the Panthers, of course, who are getting ready to do battle with the Oilers in the Stanley Cup final, may or may not be Stanley Cup champions. Either way, we know they're going to be a team that's appeared in the final 2 straight years, and there's a lot of players on that team that need new contracts, and they're going to be looking for significant raises, like Sam Reinhart, for example. Brandon Montour is another defenseman that is going to be looking for probably a longer-term deal with a fairly significant raise. Based on last year's numbers, Montour was likely looking at getting a mega deal. This year, things worked out different for him. His offensive numbers went way down, all the way down from like 73 down to 33 points. He did miss time, had shoulder surgery at the end of last year after the finals, and did miss some time getting back and was not quite the same player. So I do wonder how much that'll impact his overall value. But either way, he's a player that the Panthers would certainly like to keep. Like I said, Reinhardt's another name as well. So to get both those guys signed longer term with bigger money is going to have to come with somebody taking a haircut or somewhere else or getting moved out as a cap casualty or something. I know Tarasenko, who they got at the deadline, would really like to stay. That's going to prove challenging too. So a guy like Ekblad, who's making over $7.5 million, still has some term on his contract, could be made expendable, like I said, according to Steve Simmons of the Toronto Sun. So that's what his intel is saying there. I wouldn't completely rule it out. Ekblad's a former first overall pick, done a lot of good things for this franchise, and he's been a good player for them. There's no doubt. But there are times when he's viewed upon as being the third best defenseman on that team, which goes to show you just how deep that roster became in the last couple of years, with Gustav Forsling taking a major step forward, and you get Brandon Montour as well. And, if Ekblad is kind of looked upon as being your third most effective D, you have a good thing going there. And they also have some other defensemen that are pretty good too. And, it makes sense that Ekblad could be an odd man out. Now, he does have some trade protection in his contract, so he's going to have some say over this if anything does happen. But we know that the Florida Panthers have not been afraid to pull off the big trade. Look what they did with Calgary in that Matthew Tkachuk trade. Not to suggest this is going to be anything like that, but Aaron Ekblad could be a player with a right-shot defenseman who would generate a lot of interest, for sure, with a decent contract. So we'll see how things play out. The Panthers are still not done yet. Once their season is over, we'll likely get a lot more intel from that team on what they're looking to do, but that would not be shocking if that's the way things went here right now. And, of course, the Rangers, after getting eliminated, of course, by those Florida Panthers just in the past couple of days, lots of talk around them. We talked yesterday about Jacob Trouba. Well, there's more articles today, including Molly Walker of the New York Post, as well as Peter Baugh of The Athletic, both talking about how this team moves forward. I know they both went on to talk about Igor Shesterkin, and he might be able to command for his, because he's due for an extension. He's not a free agent just yet, but he's going to be eligible to go into that new contract after the final year begins in July 1. And speculation is that he's going to be looking for a mega deal around $12 million. And if you look at what that means from a cap percentage wise, and you look and compare that to what Henrik Lundqvist had when he was in New York, or Carey Price, or Vasilevsky, it's fair based on those cap percentages, that based on what they got. That's a lot of money. There's no doubt about it, but he's the backbone of that team. So it's hard to say no to what his demands are going to be, because you certainly don't want to lose him, but at the same time, that's going to play a major role in how they have what they have for money to address the rest of the team. I know they both these writers went on to suggest that it's pretty much I wouldn't call that a given, but very, very likely that Capo Caco gets traded. The former number 2 overall pick has not worked out. We've seen Lafreniere finally take off, and Caco is still struggling to be consistent and put up much of an offensive result. So to me, Caco being traded, probably very, very, very likely. I know Ball went on to say in The Athletic as well that he thinks they could shake up the core, and he went on to talk about Jacob Trouba like I did yesterday. My piece yesterday on Trouba was more from the fan perspective, that I've seen lots of fans online looking for Trouba to be traded or bought out. He's got 2 years left, $8 million. That's a problematic contract based on how he played. He hasn't lived up to it. And like I said before, my opinion, he's so focused on the big hit that he takes himself out of position a lot. Indeed, he's become a major defensive liability. Could he bounce back and be better for them? He absolutely could. So I suspect more than likely we won't see Trouba moved. But I know with these writers and the fans all talking about it, it seems to be the common name that comes up for them with the ability to kind of retool a bit. I mean, if they talk to Trouba about his contract and his protection of trade in his contract, could they figure out a place for him to go where they could retain salary? It would be better than buying him out, because with 2 years left, his cap hit would go from 8 to 4 in those final 2 years, and then they'd have 2 extra years with a lower cap hit. It would be a decent value. But if they could do a retention and trade and only have a cap hit for 2 years, even if they had to retain 50%, they would still get $4 million in cap space back and would not have to deal with that for 4 years. They'd only have it for 2. So at the end of the day, I would not be shocked if they at least consider it. But like I said, given the fact that he's the captain and they won the Mark Messier Leadership Award and just the whole, what he brings to the locker room, I don't know how much Chris Drury's going to want to move him. But with all these writers and all the fans talking about it, it makes you wonder. They all seem to think that some type of core shakeup within the Rangers group is necessary, and that he seems to be the name coming up the most. So let me know what you think amongst all of today's news and rumors down in the comments. We'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, of course, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with all the news, rumors, and analysis of all 32 NHL teams. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you next time.